It was a golden afternoon in Los Angeles, the kind that seemed to promise nothing but serenity. Clint Eastwood, the legendary actor and director, was enjoying a rare day off from his busy schedule. Known for his rugged charm and stoic demeanor, Clint had an aura that turned heads wherever he went, though he rarely sought the spotlight in his private life. That day, he decided to treat himself to lunch at LA Terrace, one of the city's most exclusive restaurants. The venue, renowned for its blend of sophistication and exclusivity, was a favorite among celebrities, influencers, and high-profile executives. Clint had dined there before, appreciating the understated elegance and the discretion of the staff. The restaurant's large glass doors opened to reveal a spacious, sunlit dining area, adorned with minimalist decor that exuded class. Patrons whispered conversations over glasses of fine wine, and the soft hum of jazz music played in the background. Clint stepped inside wearing a crisp white shirt, casual jeans, and his signature cowboy boots. Perched on his head was a worn-out baseball cap, one that bore the American flag and the words, "Support our troops." It wasn't a political statement for Clint. It was a tribute to his deep respect for veterans and the values they represented. As he walked in, the room seemed to momentarily pause. Heads turned and whispers filled the air. Most recognized him immediately, but their glances shifted quickly to the cap he wore. Clint remained unaware of the growing tension, his focus on the hostess who greeted him with a professional smile. She led him to a quiet corner table near the window, where he could enjoy a view of the bustling street outside. He sat down, removed his sunglasses, and opened the menu. While he scanned the options, the room's atmosphere subtly shifted. A couple at the next table exchanged hushed words, their eyes darting toward Clint. Near the bar, two waiters whispered animatedly, one gesturing discreetly toward him. The manager, a sharply dressed man in his mid-40s named Richard, noticed the murmurs and approached the bar. "What's going on?" he asked one of the servers. The young waiter hesitated before nodding toward Clint. "It's the hat," he whispered. "Some guests are uncomfortable." Richard frowned, his gaze landing on Clint's table. He saw the cap and felt a pang of unease. The restaurant prided itself on being a neutral space, a sanctuary from the outside world's noise and controversy. Any display that could be perceived as political was discouraged, though the policy was rarely enforced. After a moment's hesitation, Richard straightened his tie and walked toward Clint's table. His steps were brisk, his expression composed but firm. As he neared, Clint looked up, his piercing eyes meeting Richard's. "Mr. Eastwood," Richard began, his voice measured but loud enough to draw nearby diners' attention. "Welcome to LA Terrace. I hope you're enjoying your visit." Clint nodded politely. "I am, thank you." Richard hesitated, then continued. "I need to address something. We have a policy against any form of apparel that could be considered political. Your hat, while well-meaning, may not align with that policy. I'm going to have to ask you to remove it." For a moment, there was silence. Clint set down the menu and leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "I wasn't aware of that policy," he said calmly, his voice carrying the weight of his years and experiences. "It's not political. It's about support for our troops." Richard nodded, his tone softening, but his stance unchanged. "I understand, sir, but we aim to maintain a neutral environment here. I hope you can understand my position." Clint studied Richard for a moment, his gaze unwavering. Then with a slight nod, he stood, placing the menu back on the table. "If that's how you feel, I'll leave," he said evenly. The room fell into an uneasy hush. Clint adjusted his hat, picked up his belongings, and walked toward the door. His footsteps echoed in the silence, and the door closed softly behind him. Outside, Clint paused, taking in the warm California breeze. He tipped his hat slightly, as if reaffirming his choice to wear it, and began walking down the street. He wasn't angry, disappointed perhaps, but not surprised. Over the years, he had seen how quick people were to judge, how easily lines were drawn, and how often principles were compromised for the sake of comfort or appearances. At a small public park a few blocks away, Clint found an empty bench and sat down. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through messages and news updates. As he sat there lost in thought, an idea began to form, a way to turn this moment into something meaningful. Clint Eastwood sat quietly on the park bench, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the pavement. Around him, families played with their children, joggers passed by with their earbuds in, and a street musician strummed a soulful tune on his guitar. Despite the noise and movement, Clint's mind was consumed by the events at LA Terrace. He wasn't one to dwell on public perception or seek conflict, yet the subtle indignity of being asked to remove his hat, a simple tribute to the troops, gnawed at him. It wasn't about the restaurant's policy or even the manager's approach. It was about the broader issue it symbolized. Had society become so divided that even a gesture of support for those who served their country was seen as divisive? As Clint pondered, a young woman approached, holding a notepad and pen. She looked nervous but determined. "Excuse me, Mr. Eastwood," she asked tentatively. Clint looked up, his steely gaze softening as he saw her earnest expression. "Yes?" "I don't mean to bother you," she said quickly, "but I saw what happened at the restaurant. I just wanted to say I admire what you did. It takes courage to stand by your principles, especially when it's not the easy thing to do." Clint smiled faintly. "Thank you, miss. I appreciate that." The woman hesitated, then handed him the notepad. "Would you mind signing this? My dad's a huge fan of yours. He's a Vietnam veteran, and your movies mean a lot to him." Clint took the notepad and pen, scribbling a short message before signing his name. "What's his name?" he asked. "Frank," she replied, her voice filled with pride. Clint wrote, "To Frank, with respect and gratitude, Clint Eastwood." Handing it back, he said, "Tell your father I said thank you for his service." The woman beamed. "I will. Thank you, Mr. Eastwood." She walked away clutching the notepad like a treasure. The interaction warmed Clint's heart, but it also reinforced his resolve. This wasn't just about him or the incident at the restaurant. It was about the countless Franks out there, men and women who had given so much and received so little recognition in return. If wearing a simple hat could spark a conversation about honoring their sacrifices, then Clint was determined to keep wearing it, no matter the pushback. Back at LA Terrace, the fallout from Clint's departure was beginning to unfold. Several patrons had witnessed the exchange and were now discussing it with growing intensity. "I can't believe they asked him to take off his hat," one man said, shaking his head. "It's Clint Eastwood, for crying out loud." A woman at a nearby table chimed in. "It wasn't just about the hat, it's what it represents. Supporting the troops isn't a political stance, it's about respect." Richard, the manager, was beginning to feel the pressure. He had acted according to the restaurant's guidelines, but the growing backlash from patrons was hard to ignore. A few customers had even canceled their reservations, citing their disappointment in how Clint had been treated. By the end of the day, the story had begun to spread. A diner who had filmed part of the exchange posted the video online, and within hours it went viral. Social media exploded with opinions, debates, and hashtags like #Clint Eastwood support and #Stand for our troops. The next morning, Clint Eastwood woke up to a flood of messages on his phone. His assistant had left a voicemail, her voice tinged with urgency. "Clint, you need to check the news. This thing at the restaurant, it's everywhere. Call me when you get this." Clint groaned slightly as he sat up, rubbing his temples. He wasn't someone who got swept up in the whirlwind of modern media. Still, curiosity got the better of him, and he turned on the television. The screen lit up with a national morning news program. The anchor, an impeccably dressed man with a polished smile, spoke with measured excitement. Actor and director Clint Eastwood has found himself at the center of a growing national debate after an incident at a high-profile Los Angeles restaurant yesterday. A video of Eastwood leaving the establishment after being asked to remove his hat, a cap bearing a tribute to the troops, has gone viral, sparking widespread discussion about respect, patriotism, and restaurant policies. The video played on the screen. Clint watched as the footage showed him standing up, his face calm but resolute, and placing a few bills on the table before walking out. The sound of murmurs and whispers from other diners filled the background. The anchor continued. The video has garnered millions of views overnight, with the hashtags #Clint Eastwood support and #Troop tribute trending across multiple platforms. While some have praised Eastwood's stand as a gesture of respect for veterans, others argue the restaurant was within its rights to enforce its dress code. Joining us now to discuss this is cultural commentator Sarah Weathers and retired Marine Corps Colonel Jacob Carter. The segment cut to a split screen of two faces. Sarah, a young, sharply dressed woman, spoke first. "Look, I respect Clint Eastwood as an artist and a public figure. But this is about rules. The restaurant has a right to enforce its dress code. This isn't an attack on veterans. It's about maintaining a certain atmosphere." Colonel Carter, a grizzled man with a commanding presence, was quick to respond. "With all due respect, this isn't just about rules. This is about what that hat represents." Clint Eastwood wasn't making a political statement. He was honoring the men and women who've served this country. If we can't make room for a simple gesture like that, what does it say about us as a society? The debate continued, but Clint turned off the television. He didn't need to hear the back and forth to understand what was happening. The incident had struck a nerve, and now it was spiraling into something much bigger than he had anticipated. On social media, the reactions were swift and impassioned. Some users shared personal stories about their family members who had served in the military, expressing gratitude for Clint's stand. Others criticized the restaurant, calling for boycotts and leaving scathing reviews online. One post in particular stood out. A young man named Alex shared a photo of his grandfather, a World War II veteran, wearing a similar hat to Clint's. The caption read, "My grandpa always wore his veteran cap with pride, even when people gave him strange looks. Thank you, Clint Eastwood, for reminding us what real respect looks like." The post quickly went viral, gaining over 1 million likes and thousands of comments. People began sharing their own photos and stories, creating a wave of collective appreciation for veterans that hadn't been seen in years. But the backlash wasn't limited to online posts. The restaurant, Terrace, found itself in the eye of the storm. Its social media pages were inundated with comments ranging from polite criticism to outright fury. Some users demanded an apology to Clint Eastwood, while others vowed never to dine there again. Richard, the manager, was overwhelmed. He had always prided himself on running a classy, upscale establishment, but now his reputation and the restaurant's was under siege. He spent the day fielding calls from reporters, irate customers, and even the restaurant's investors, all demanding answers. Meanwhile, Clint decided to take matters into his own hands. He wasn't interested in fueling the controversy, but he saw an opportunity to redirect the conversation towards something meaningful. He contacted a local veterans organization he had supported in the past. After a brief discussion, they agreed to organize a public event, a small gathering to honor local veterans and raise awareness about their needs. Clint wanted the focus to be on them, not him. Word of the event spread quickly. Within hours, it was being promoted across social media, with people from all over the city expressing their interest in attending. As the controversy continued to grow, Terrace released a public statement. At Terrace, we strive to provide an inclusive and welcoming environment for all our guests. We deeply regret that our policy enforcement led to an uncomfortable situation for Mr. Clint Eastwood, a respected figure and advocate for veterans. We are actively reviewing our policies to ensure they reflect our commitment to respect and understanding. We have also reached out to Mr. Eastwood to express our apologies and discuss how we can support veterans in our community. The statement received mixed reactions. Some saw it as a genuine attempt to make amends, while others dismissed it as damage control. The day of the event arrived, and the turnout exceeded everyone's expectations. The park where it was held was filled with people of all ages, many wearing hats or shirts bearing tributes to the military. Veterans shared stories, families hugged their loved ones, and children waved small American flags. Clint stood near the podium, watching the scene with a sense of quiet pride. When it was his turn to speak, he kept his remarks brief but heartfelt. "This isn't about me," he began, his voice steady but emotional. "It's about the men and women who've served this country, who've given so much and asked for so little in return. We owe them our respect, our gratitude, and our support, not just today, but every day." The crowd erupted into applause, and for a moment, the noise and chaos of the world seemed to fade away. The gathering at the park became more than just an event. It was the spark that ignited a movement. Media outlets covered it extensively, capturing not only Clint Eastwood's speech, but also the heartfelt testimonies of veterans and their families. Social media flooded with posts under a new hashtag, #HonorOurHeroes, which quickly gained traction worldwide. Stories began pouring in from every corner of the country. A teacher in Kansas organized a school assembly to honor local veterans. A diner in Texas announced a permanent discount for service members and their families. Even large corporations got involved, pledging donations to veteran support organizations. For Clint, the transformation was humbling. What had started as a quiet stand over a simple hat had become a national conversation about respect, gratitude, and the importance of remembering those who served. Despite the overwhelming support, there were dissenting voices. Some critics accused Clint of grandstanding, claiming the event was a publicity stunt. Others argued that the focus on veterans, while noble, overshadowed broader issues of equality and inclusion. Clint, however, remained unfazed. He had never been one to court public approval, and he wasn't about to start now. But he did take the time to address the criticism during an interview with a well-known journalist. "I didn't plan for any of this to happen," he said, his voice steady. "I walked out of that restaurant because I believed in something. That's it. If people want to read more into it, that's their choice. But for me, this has always been about respect for the men and women who've sacrificed so much for this country. And if that message resonates, then I'm grateful for it." The interview aired during prime time, reaching millions of viewers. Clint's sincerity struck a chord, silencing many of his critics and reinforcing his image as a man of principle. Inspired by the growing momentum, Clint decided to take things a step further. He collaborated with several veteran support organizations to launch a nationwide campaign called Stand for Service. The campaign had three main goals: awareness, educating the public about the challenges veterans face, from homelessness to mental health struggles; support, raising funds for veteran-focused programs, including job training, counseling services, and housing initiatives; connection, encouraging communities to engage with local veterans through events, mentorship programs, and volunteer work. The campaign's launch event was held at a historic theater in Los Angeles. The venue was packed with celebrities, veterans, and community leaders. Clint took the stage, his iconic presence commanding the room. "This isn't about politics," he began, his voice calm but firm. "It's about people, real people, who've given everything to protect the freedoms we often take for granted. They deserve more than just our gratitude. They deserve our action." The crowd erupted in applause as Clint stepped back, letting a veteran share her story. Meanwhile, at LA Terrace, Richard, the manager, was grappling with the fallout. The restaurant's reputation had taken a severe hit, with reservations plummeting and public scrutiny showing no signs of abating. Determined to make things right, Richard reached out to Clint personally. After several attempts, he managed to arrange a meeting. They sat together in a small cafe, far removed from the glitz and glamour of LA Terrace. "Mr. Eastwood," Richard began nervously, "I want to apologize, not just for how we handled the situation, but for not recognizing the significance of that hat. I've learned a lot over these past few weeks, and I want to do better." Clint studied him for a moment before responding. "Apologies are a good start, but what matters is what you do next." Richard nodded. "I agree. That's why we've decided to host a monthly dinner for veterans and their families, free of charge, and we're donating a portion of our profits to veteran support organizations." Clint's expression softened. "That's a good step. Just make sure it's more than a gesture." The two men shook hands, and for the first time in weeks, Richard felt a sense of hope. Months passed, and the impact of Clint's actions continued to ripple outward. The Stand for Service campaign became a national success, raising millions of dollars and inspiring countless acts of kindness. Clint, however, remained characteristically humble. When asked about the movement during another interview, he simply said, "I didn't start this. The people did. I just lit the match." Back at his home in Carmel, Clint returned to his quiet routine. He spent his days walking along the beach, reading scripts, and enjoying the simple pleasures of life. But every now and then, he'd receive a letter or a message from someone whose life had been touched by the movement. One such letter came from Alex, the young man who had posted the viral photo of his grandfather. "Mr. Eastwood," it read, "I just wanted to thank you again. My grandfather passed away recently, but before he did, he saw what you started. He told me it was the first time in years he felt truly seen. You gave him that, and for that, I'll always be grateful." Clint folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer filled with similar messages. He didn't need awards or accolades. This, knowing he had made a difference, was more than enough.